Greeting viewers, thank you for joining us. Columbia Global Centers Nairobi warmly welcomes you to the continuation of the African Book Talk series. Columbia Global Centers Nairobi is part of 9 regional hubs positioned around the world by Columbia University. The centers serve as platforms for dialogue and the exchange of knowledge in research, education, as well as public programming. We are delighted that you have chosen to be part of this broad network because we would not be able to achieve our mission without your participation. Today, it's our honor to feature the work of Professor John Akama. We are going to be discussing his book, which is titled Undeterred, A Rural Boy's Journey to the Pinnacle of Academia. Professor John Akama is a Vice Chancellor of Kisii University. He is the founding principal of the then Kisii University College, which he led to formally acquiring a charter in 2013 to become a fully fledged university. Professor Akama did his undergraduate studies in education at the University of Nairobi. He then proceeded to the USA, where he undertook master's and PhD studies at Ohio State University and Southern Illinois University, respectively. On returning to Kenya, he joined Moi University as a lecturer and rose to the rank of professor, teaching at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. Over the years, Professor Akama has conducted extensive research and has published widely in diverse areas such as culture, sociology, tourism, and wildlife conservation. His keen interest and research in the evolution, culture, and history of the Gusii is reflected in this book. It is our hope that this story will be a source of inspiration to you, whichever stage of life you're in. Our moderator this afternoon will be Wendy Gilroge, a book curator, entrepreneur, community builder, and reading advocate who has formal and informal experience in the book industry in Kenya. As a bookseller and community builder, she served as the lead in marketing for the biggest bookshop chain in Kenya for 5 years, where she established and hosted the largest corporate-sponsored book club. Wendy has since transitioned to be an entrepreneur focused on filling market gaps of access and availability of books in Kenya under the brand Somanami Books. Somanami Books is a book lovers hub comprising a book club, bookstore, book subscription service, and book forum. As a curator at Books and Wine, a community books and wine enthusiast, Wendy drives the discoverability of books and literary works. The community interacts through the Books and Wine website, newsletter, social media, and regular events. As a reading advocate driven by the conviction of books, transformative power, she is a part of a trio that runs a podcast or video podcast named Things Fall Together, which uses literary works to highlight, interrogate, and spark conversations about current issues in society. Before we get started, kindly note, this program is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. As we proceed, please post your questions under the Q&A section. The moderator will direct them to the panel at the end of our session today. Remember to follow us on social media so that you can stay updated on our upcoming programs. Our handles are CGC at CGC Nairobi for Facebook and Twitter, cgc.nairobi for Instagram, and Columbia Global Centers Nairobi for YouTube. I would now like to hand over the program to Wendy Gilroge. Wendy will introduce the discussant and progress with the session. We will also be posting extended bios of our panelists in the chat for your review. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for that good and fitting introduction, especially of our focus of the discussion today, who is Professor Akama. And I would hereby like to welcome everybody to the discussion. As Pauline mentioned, please feel free to leave your questions to raise your hand, and we'll get to your questions. So today we are joined by the two discussants who are doctors, Nyandoro and Dr. Barasa. So Dr. George Nyandoro teaches literature in the Department of Language, Linguistics and Literature at Kisii University. He's also the director of the Board of Postgraduate Studies at the university. He specializes in life writing, but has an interest in literary criticism, film criticism, and identity politics. And Dr. Barasa, Dr. Margaret Barasa, is an experienced lecturer with a demonstrated history of working in higher education industry. Dr. Barasa is skilled in research, preparing newsletters, proofreading, editing, and in aspects of language and culture. She also has a strong education professional background with a PhD focused in linguistics from Laikipia University, Masters of Arts in English, Language and Linguistics, and a BD Arts from Egerton University. Thank you, Drs. Nyandoro, Drs. Barasa, and of course, Professor Akama for joining this conversation. And I was very excited when I saw, of course, the book that is the focus for the book talk series today, because it's laden in a lot of anecdotes, a lot of wisdom, and I'm happy to be speaking with a person who has lived the life. Welcome.
Thank you, Wendy.
So I will keep the conversation moving back and forth between yourself, Professor Akama, as well as the two discussants. And my dear, my fellow panelists, should you want to interject, please feel free to do that. But allow me to kick off this book discussion of the book. In focus today is Undeterred, a rural boy's journey to the pinnacle of academia, featuring the life of Professor Akama. I would like to kick off with a very maybe easy but still profound question of what motivated you to tell this story, Professor?
Thank you, Wendy, for that question. I want to say that generally there is a belief that autobiographies and biographies are written by celebrities and famous people, politically or socially or economically famous people. And because of that, I want to say that most of the human stories, as rich as they may be, are usually not told. For instance, the real communal history, culture, and the socioeconomic development of the majority of the citizenry may not be documented. For example, when we look at our pre-colonial history of our ancestors, is poorly documented and written in a very biased manner based on a Eurocentric approach. When we look at the struggles for independence, where the peasants played a very critical role, you find that what is being told is basically the work of the people who are not really in the middle of this struggle. Even when we talk about post-colonial Kenya, the struggles of the ordinary Kenyans is rarely told. No, within that context, what made me now tell my own story in this book is a very strong urge, which I wanted to share my life history and experience. As much as it may have imperfections, I wanted to share my life history with various people within my country, Kenya, and possibly even abroad. So fundamentally, the issue here is that everybody has got a story to tell, but in many instances, most of us don't tell our stories. And because of that, we leave the telling of our stories to a few Erites who sometimes don't capture the reality of things as they happen. Thank you.
Indeed, you're very correct in that. And I think it's been said before that history is written by the winner. And I think in this case, they mean history, say like the history of war, because that is the person who survives to tell the story. But you're very correct. And I can tell that intentionality when you're telling this story, because yes, it's your personal account of the life that you've lived and the things that you've gone through, but you've taken the time to reflect on historical events along the way, be they on a national scale or international scale. And that really sheds becomes a background of which your life has lived. So I just wanted to also find out if, in addition to that, is there another reason that you've chosen to highlight the historical events that have been happening around at the time that the events in your life has taken place?
Thank you very much again, Wendy. If you can look at my story in the book, my personal story is highly contextualized. And we find that events are interwoven in terms of historical events, national and internationally. And I've done my story within that broad context. And we can say that to give examples, particularly my early life, I started off my life in a very simple manner. I was brought up in a simple peasantly rural life in the hinterland of Kenya. I lived with my parents in a grass church, hut. People fetched water. There was nothing like piped water. We find that people consumed traditional foods using even the traditional vegetables in a very simple kind of lifestyle. And I believe that most people, particularly in Africa, can easily relate to that kind of life, particularly people who were born, like say 50, 40 years ago. And in this story, I realized that I cannot really only just focus on me and me alone. I have got to contextualize it as much as I can. And through my story, for instance, you can clearly pick, if you read the story properly, you can find out aspects of the struggle for independence in Kenya. When I talk about my father being a unionist when he was working in the tea plantations in Kericho, when I talk about people watching radio to hear news about the prominent Kenyans who are involved in the struggle, when I talk about the students when we met Jomo Kenyatta, when we were a young kid in a primary school, Kenyatta's entourage was passing through Kericho, and we were able to see Kenyatta, Tomboya, and all that. That contextualizes, the history of our country, particularly at the time of independence, and also the various issues. The issues of the conflicts between Christianity and indigenous cultures. It comes out very clearly in my book, and I think this is an history which most of us can relate to. For instance, when I went through the traditional initiation, circumcision ceremony, the values I was inculcated with were quite different from when I went into Buddhism. When I went through circumcision, I was told that if somebody wrongs you, if somebody does something bad to you, you have got to respond, tit for that. But when I was going through the church, I was told of being kind, being forgiving, and always, if somebody slaps you, you give him the other cheek. So all those kind of issues which are contradictory, many of us can relate with them very well. The issue of our education system, somebody reading through my book will find out that the book clearly, my life history, the way I started my school in the 60s, and the primary school, secondary school, high school, university, it provides basically a contextual analysis of the evolution of the Kenyan education system. Another example is of my American dream. The American dream, many Africans who are in America, all Kenyans and foreigners can easily relate to my American dream. For instance, the issues of the culture shock. When I entered into America, I entered into a very unique system, which was highly capitalistic. I've given an example of this professor who invited us for some lunch, and we joined him, and we thought that he was going to pay for that meal, only for him to pay for his own meal and leave us stranded. And we had to look for ways of paying for ourselves. Meaning that in America, it's capitalism, and you have got to be very careful that everything you do, you have got to do it based on your own resources. The concept of meritocracy is something which I learned quite well in America. And I realized that through my university training at master's and PhD level, if you compete and if you work hard, you will always, the doors will be open for you through meritocracy, even if you are a foreigner. The issues of the Cold War, I can say that during that time, the 1970s, the 1980s, was during the Cold War. And you would see it even in the university where we were, even in Kenya, where Maina Kenyati was teaching us about communism. And also when we went to America, where we find that the issues of the Cold War, when we were taking lectures, were very much part of the life. So my story is very much contextualized, and it relates to those in national and also international events, and they're highly captured in my book. Yes, Wendy.
Very well, very well. I had such an interesting time reading the book, and also it's told in a very easy way that it flows, and you could also get the sense of the kind of person that you are. You've always been very aware of your surroundings, and that comes out in the story. So I'm curious to know how your exposure and the norms and such like things. So I guess the question to you is, how has your exposure shaped or changed how you view the world?
Thank you very much, Wendy, for that pertinent question. What I am today is based on the exposure, on how I grew up. For instance, my early life in a rural African village has really shaped me. I can say that as a person, I've got a very strong cultural identity. Fundamentally, as much as I have traversed the world, I do have that very clear identity from the community where I was born, and also having also a Kenyan identity. As such, I do have that sense of belonging by virtue of the way I was brought up from my childhood, coming, onwards. Also, I have got a very, very strong traits of communal life. Surprisingly, as much as I went through America, capitalism, I was never transformed. I'm a very communal person, and probably that's why I really love working in rural environments such as Kizu University and even at Moi University where I was. I never became a capitalist. I have also to say, Wendy, that because of my very many life struggles in struggling through the education system from very humble background, interacting with the diverse groups of people here in Kenya, in Africa, in the US, in Europe and Asia, have managed to also have a very broad worldview. As much as I do have this clear identity, I've not run away from having a very broad worldview that all of us, we act in this global arena, which is now becoming, a very global village. In other words, Wendy, I can say that I am one of those people who I think globally, but as much as possible, I do act locally. So that is quite interesting on that. And also, mind you, eventually I was trained in the field of geography, particularly as it relates to environmental planning, and management. Because of that training, Wendy, as much as I talk about everything about culture, I'm also a conservationist. I'm also a naturalist. And as we talk here, I take issues of destruction of the environment, issues of pollution of our water systems, issues of climate change very seriously. And I try to influence people around me on how to be able to conserve and protect our environment. Also, in America, I learned about very many positive American values, issues of promptness, timekeeping, issues of planning your work, issues of orderliness, issues of meritocracy, hard work, are things which I learned through my life experience in America, where I stayed for a period of 8 years. Here in the university, one thing I've learned now being a vice chancellor, Wendy, is that don't take anything at its face value. Whatever comes across to you, you have got to look at it critically and try to find out the hidden messages on what is coming about. But more importantly, also, you realize that you are dealing with diverse people, with diverse interests. So you should know how to match and marry all these conflicting interests as you move forward. So I have, through those exposures, Wendy, have managed now to know what to do and how to move forward in my life and how to interact with people and society in general.
Indeed, that's a good philosophy of picking the best as from each individual culture that you're exposed to, and you become the better for it. Allow me at this juncture to invite one of our discussants in this forum, and that's Dr. Barasa. Good evening, Dr. Barasa.
Good evening, Wendy.
Thank you for joining us today. And I hope you agree with me as you read this book. It really triggers a lot of inspiration. And right out from the prologue of the book, where it makes the argument for why everybody should document their life stories, you sort of feel the need that, yeah, this is something that everybody should try and document their life story, and not just the big and the big and mighty, like the professor had mentioned earlier, but really everybody else, because then it gives a complete historical view of our life and times. And in that case, I'm curious to know whether there's some way you can direct people who don't have the resources or the skills, because writing is truly an art and a science. Is there some places that or some archivists who are working that you can direct people, somebody who is interested in pursuing this further, but they're not a traditional writer? Dr. Barasa?
Thank you, Wendy. First of all, I want to agree with you that there is need to document our cultural histories. And when we go back to the autobiography, you see that the author demystifies the big man syndrome. As the author has put it, it is our belief that only celebrities, and especially those from the political arena, can tell their stories. However, when you go through the autobiography, you realize that the author is a very simple person from a very humble background. He has demonstrated by narrating his life experiences in the journey, just from a rural boy to the pinnacle of academia. So what I want to say is that for sure, ordinary people are encouraged to write their stories. And when they do that, they will be assisting in reconstructing their history and also the history of the nation, just the same way the author has done it. However, I want to say that in as much as we do have activists who assist in documenting these stories, are available in Kenya. Even in our university, Kisii University, we do have the Department of Languages, which can assist people, ordinary people, tell their stories and document. Despite that, there is still a challenge because most of the African communities are orate as opposed to literate. Therefore, in as much as the author has documented his life story, this might not be the case for most of the people from such or right societies. Therefore, there is need to assist them to tell their stories. And I want to agree with you that for sure we do have resources, though not adequate, for ordinary people to document such stories. Back to you, Wendy.
Thank you very much, and I hope the people in our audience have taken note of that very important insight, and really the importance that you reiterate of documenting our histories. Dr. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Nyandoro, who I had introduced in the beginning, who is also one of our co-discussants. Dr. Nyandoro, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Wendy. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you very much.
I'm very curious to pick your mind on this issue of life writing, because I realize it's your forte, and you have extensive experience in this. So, what does that process look like from the time that a person gets the idea that they want to write a biography or an autobiography? What is that procedure, and from the idea to the complete product, and what are some of the challenges that somebody can needs to be aware and can look out for?
Thank you very much, Wendy. As you're aware, an autobiographer is a living human being. Now, because of that, and a human being is a complex of many things. He has very many selves. A human being has very, very many selves. So the first point of entry in writing your story is that you have, first of all, to determine if you have a story to write. And a number of times, many people stop there because they probably think that they don't have a story to tell. As Dr. Baraza said earlier, much as there are many stories to be told, quite a number of people think that they don't have a story to tell. Now, that is the point of inception. Now, the second point then, after you have determined that you have a story to tell, the question you must ask yourself is that out of the many things that you are, because a human being is very many things, out of the many selves that you are, which self do you think you would like to foreground? Now, that is not an easy thing. You are a father, you are a scholar, you are a husband, you are all these kinds of things. And which of those things do you think is important for you to tell? Now, once you determine what it is you want to foreground in what we call as the organizing principle, you then emplot that which you want to tell. But for purposes of that emplotment, in other words, making this a plotted narrative, it is important for you to determine the audience. Who do you want to write for? Who's going to read your story? Professor Akama is a vice chancellor in a university. So what kind of story is he going to write? If it was, say for instance, a politician, what kind of story does he want to write, and who is going to be the audience? So these are the important things that you need to try and think about when you are crafting your story. Now, the most important thing then after that is to try and see how to navigate around a triangulation of one, you as the author, then two, you as the narrator, and then three, you as the protagonist. Because you are entering this space of the narrative from a public space of existence. And these transitions need to be managed properly. And if you don't manage them properly, then you are likely to have either a story that sounds like it's a public relations exercise on the one hand, or a story that is flat or is confused or does not have a clear trajectory. Thank you very much, Wendy.
That's very good insight, and like you said, you have to package the story that you're giving, because it cannot be a chronological events of everything that has ever happened to you. Thank you for that insight. I'd like to throw the ball back to Professor, and just to illuminate the title a little bit. The book is called Undeterred, A Rural Boy's Journey to the Pinnacle of Academia. And indeed, you're at the pinnacle of academia. Well done, Professor. But I'm sure you've not made it this far by yourself. So what other significant people, or what other people have helped you shape your life, shape your journey, inspired you, and contributed to where you are today, to where you stand? Professor?
Thank you very much, Wendy, for that pertinent question. I have got to say that the issue of the significant others is very much captured in my book as you read it through the chapters. I have got to say that, and I feel it's very important, as somebody grows up and becomes an adult, if you don't have the proper role models, if you don't have people to guide you, people to lean on, you may end up not coming out well. I've given an example here, particularly of my late mom, Teresia Kwamboka, who worked very hard and sacrificed to bring the family to where it became a two. This lady worked almost single-handedly. My father was more of an easygoing person. He was a good man, but the person behind our family was our mother. And through her commitment, our struggle, fighting poverty and fighting patriarchal kind of behaviors, we were able to be where we are. In fact, I can say, Wendy, that I am who I am because of my late mom. She basically sacrificed her life to make us live a comfortable life, to make us go to school and be what we are. And I can say, Wendy, my mom relates to very many women. I think women in Africa, they are the unsung heroes. They are the unsung heroines. They are the people who make things happen, and eventually the men take credit. I've also mentioned the story of my paternal grandfather. My paternal grandfather, who was of Manzai origin, he was born during the early parts of the 20th century, and he was very much part of the colonial system. And you can say that he was very resistant. When he was captured to go to work in the colonial, work, he resisted and he had to run away from there. And he did so many other things which are very daring, going to war and all that. And when I talk about people, like for instance, in my academic journey, I talk about some significant people. For instance, in America, I came across somebody, Thad Bernard. Thad Bernard, a very unique American, somebody who epitomizes the American dream, and somebody who's quite liberal and helpful. I've talked about somebody like Syria Nyamweru, who guided me academically at the University of Nairobi, and later became my mentor in very many ways as I was growing up academically. My Christopher Rand, Robert Maxson, Gifford Doxey. Gifford Doxey is a very interesting character. This is a professor who was at Ohio University. Where I went to was Ohio University, not Ohio State. And this guy was only American whom I found that was ready to give money. He will give me free money. And for sure the free money will give me, I will end up misusing the money with my friends because it's the money which I got easily. And I found this Gifford Doxey to be quite unique compared with Americans who cannot give you anything for free. So all those people saved my life, and I am what I am at the moment because of the influence of these significant others.
Thank you for paying homage to everybody that has assisted you and inspired you and really just cleared the way for you. And it's true that there's a saying that goes that that God could not be everywhere, so he created mothers. So I heard you say that your mother is is a big reason for the kind of person you are today, I cannot agree more. And so I'd like to move the conversation along because I see our time is steadily moving well. And I'd like to throw this question to Dr. Barasa once more. And I noticed that you have a background in culture and linguistics and has had a very distinguished professional career. So my question to you is inspired by a quote by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who says that in colonial conquest, language did not mind what did to the mind what the sword did to the bodies of the colonized. What is your take on this, seeing as language is both a carrier of meaning and also a carrier of message? And what are some of the ways that we can reclaim some of the things that we've lost as a result of colonial invasion and occupations? Dr. Barasa?
Thank you, Wendy. This is what I want to say, that Ngugi wa Thiong'o has always advocated and argued for the preservation of and inclusion of African languages, even in learning institutions. So in line with the argument, I want to bring on board a linguist by the name Sapir Wolf, who put up a hypothesis which says that there's a relationship between language, culture, thought, and society. So if we are to look at this relationship between language, thought, culture, and society, we would say that whatever that does not exist in our environment will not be conceptualized in our languages because it would not be existing in our minds. Consequently, Ngugi argues that there is a relationship also between language, culture, and colonization. And therefore, there is the need to decolonize the African mind. So in view of Ngugi's argument, I want to say that during the colonial period or during the colonial conquest, there was obliteration of African languages. And consequently, that obliteration erased the social, cultural, and linguistic heritage of Africa. So much of what is documented in Professor Akama's autobiography is one way of documenting our cultural, our colonial histories and our post-colonial histories. And in doing so, we bring on board our indigenous languages. So what I would also want to say is that if we do away with the African languages, then we are destroying our cultural histories. And the way the colonial master did it was one sure way of doing away with our cultural histories. Therefore, language is at the center of decolonization. Now, in line with that, therefore, it is important to use our indigenous languages so that we document our cultures. And we can do that if we write about our histories, our cultural histories, the way Professor Akama has done it. So that is the surest way of making sure that our languages are documented, and doing so, we document our histories. For example, what I want to say is that when we decolonize our minds through language, then we also need to decolonize and transform the education system. How do we do that? We can do this by introducing African languages in schools, especially at elementary or primary school level, and even at the university level, because when you look at foreign languages, yes, they impart knowledge in people, but there is a very, let me say, a disjuncture between learning and the lived experience, which is exemplified by the African indigenous languages. So how has the autobiography brought on board the lived experience of the Africans? When you look at the autobiography, you see that the professor has outlined most of the culture of the Abagusi people. For example, we see that he brings on board the belief system of the Gusi witchcraft. He talks about the typical traditions and customs of the Gusi. For instance, the naming ceremony. He details how he was given his name, Sorana. He talks about the holy shrine of the Gusi people. We see him talking about the traditional procedures of getting to the shrine and how people would offer prayers and even sacrifices. Then we also see the child naming ceremony as a very extensive ceremony, and it really brings on board the Gusi traditions and cultures. I was so much interested in the Gusi male initiation ceremony, though women are not allowed there because women do have theirs, and that's a contested topic which I may not want to bring on board, but even the author talks about it as a contested area. But again, he documents the initiation ceremonies of Abagusi, even the ritualistic trees, the sacredness of the trees in Abagusi is documented vividly. The seclusion periods, not to mention the use of Egegusi words with corresponding meanings. What else do we want to talk about if that is not documenting our culture or documenting our traditions through language? And lastly, he brings on board now, he juxtaposes the African culture through whatever I've mentioned with the Western way of life, and gives way forward that we need to integrate the two systems of life if we are to produce a person or an individual who is all round. Back to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Dr. Barasa, for thank you, Dr. Barasa, for that fully well-rounded question, and also tying it to the book and what this particular book has been able to do in furthering the ability for us to archive our experiences, archive our culture, and even just leave it for future generations. I'd like to come back to Dr. Nyandoro with a question coming from that. A lot of life writing is dependent on memory, yeah? And because of course, as you're going through life, you're not walking around with a notebook and noting all these events. So you have to come back and sit with yourself and reflect and depend on memory. But as we know, memory is not 100% always correct. There are a lot of things that are emphasized and some that are de-emphasized. So as a life writer, or as somebody who is assisting, or as somebody who's writing their own story, or somebody who is writing a story on behalf of another, how do you account for this inherent flaw in how humans remember details, and so as to capture a very almost realistic account of what happened? In the meantime, I'd like to come back to Professor Akama and and say that hindsight is a very good is a very good tool, because sometimes you can look at something from the future, or rather you can look at something that has passed and think of different ways that you could have approached it. And while you're going through the process, that's not always the case. And seeing as you've lived a very rich and illustrious life, are there certain episodes in your life that you now can look back on with the value of hindsight, and also having accumulated a lot of wisdom, of course, that comes with age and with holding different positions? Are there certain episodes in your life, whether in your private life or in your public life, that you wish you'd have done differently, or that you wish you'd have approached in a different way?
Thank you very much, Wendy, for that question. Really, I've got to say that reflecting on my life, I can't really regret the life I've lived and the things I've done and the experiences I've encountered throughout my life. I have got to say, before I try to say things which I could have done differently, if given time, I have got to say that in life, even if you are an average person, just an average person, and I consider myself to be an average person, if you have got the right mindset, you have got focus and hard work, you will always achieve your life dreams, whether in academia, whether in business, or other areas of life. And I've got to say that if one looks at the various stages of my life, from family, school, university, and overall work experience, one can see that I have lived with hope, resilience, and determination, and hard work. And because of that, have been able to achieve many things which many of my contemporaries probably didn't achieve. However, Wendy, I've got to say that as a human being, and when you read it through my story, you will find that my story has got quite a number of imperfections. I tend to think that in my life, I was very much focused on academia. From a very early age, I was from secondary school all the way to university, to going to America. I spent almost a lot of time in academia at the expense of other facets of life. And due to that, I can say that I have underachieved in other spheres of life. Give an example is family. Wendy, you may note that I would like to say here that when you look at my age mates, at the age of 60, 62, most of my age mates now are having grown-up grandsons and the daughters. But as we talk, I married late, and due to that, my children, although now they're adults, but I don't have grandchildren and other extended families like other people. Also, Wendy, I have got to say that because of my academic and professional engagements, I've spent a lot of time outside my family environment. And because of that, I can say that it has maybe affected my children, where you find that the influence, that father influence is not very perfect. And those are the things I could have done differently. And one thing again, when they've realized is that in life, don't take things very seriously. Life, you need to relax and ponder and don't be unfair to yourself. And I believe that one of the issues I've had is always trying to blame myself and trying to go an extra mile to do things which sometimes is not necessary. So I would say that in life, please relax, take things as they come, and through that, you will be able to succeed. So those, and my biography is very realistic. I've not tried to sugarcoat anything there. I've given examples, for instance, an incident where I chased somebody from our home who was very sickly. Somebody was brought there by my father. I chased the person, and this person, when I chased him from the home, he left, and when he went out, he passed on 2 or 3 days later. When you look at that kind of conduct, I think you feel that maybe I should have acted differently. And also my encounter in America, why I left America and what happened to me there again, another issue, Wendy, which I think probably it was because of fate, but probably it would have come another way, and it would have even been more better. So fundamentally, I do have those issues, which I think, looking at them with the underside, I feel that I should have done them differently. But all in all, my life has been fulfilling, and I do thank the people around me, and also I do thank God for that. Back to you, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you for those lessons. And I think that is something that we can all appreciate. And I've taken a couple of notes even for myself, especially the not taking yourself too seriously. Enjoy the process, you know, because you only have this one life, right? So thank you for those wise words. Let me just say that anybody with a question, I can see the panel, the participants are having a very good time on the chat, and they are really celebrating this book, and they think that it's a very important thing in terms of documenting Abagusi culture, and that's what I can. That's the sentiment I can get from the chat. But if you have any question, any specific question directed to either of our co-discussants or the professor himself, please go ahead and put it as a question. You can raise your hand, or you can put it as a specific question on the chat. Dr. Nyandoro, I'll give you like a few minutes. Please, if you could just compress your very insightful answer regarding memory and how to account for those biases. Please go ahead in a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you for your question. The question had to do with memory. And I would like to clarify that when an autobiographer writes his story or her story, he's not so much engaged in merely memory, but in rememory. Because the things that happened in his life, at the point in which he is writing, he is looking at those things afresh with a fresh eye, and is beginning to see probably things he may not have thought important at the point in which he was growing up. But seeing how his life has shaped up, is able to go back to those things and identify them and give them value and meaning. For instance, if you look at the case of Professor Akama, at the point he's writing, he has had his sojourn to the United States of America, passing through university education at Kenyatta University, and his transcendentalism in terms of culture allows him to then look back to the narratives which he grew up with and assigns them meaning. In other words, the question of memory in autobiography is not a question of lifting and pasting the past. It is taking incidents of the past and assigning them meaning in view of who you are at the point of writing. So that now, if you are a professor managing a university, the questions you want to ask yourself, how did I get here? And how did every single incident in my past lead to the point in which I am here? So it's a question of afterthought. You know, you are writing after the fact. You are writing after the things have happened, they have already shaped you. So it's not a question of really basically going back to the past and merely lifting them and pasting them. I'll give one single example. In the autobiography, there's a child, a Maasai child, who is part and parcel of the genealogy, the family tree of Akama. Now, it is possible if Akama had become a farmer in the village, he may not have seen the value of this cultural transcendentalism. But the fact that he has had this sojourn to America and elsewhere, he's able to relate the value of crossing one's cultural environment and interacting with other cultures. And therefore, this Maasai child becomes meaningful in that context. Wendy?
Thank you, Dr. Nyandoro, for that. And I agree that standing at the end of life, or rather at whatever point you are in life, then the events take on a new significance. Then it's just, yeah, thank you for that answer. I see we have a question here from Wanja Kinodia asking where the book is available in bookshops in Nairobi. And also I see in the chat, somebody else is also asking about the availability of the book. So I'll ask whoever has the answer to that. I don't know who is the best person to. Professor, would you have the answer to that question of availability of the book for anybody who wants?
Yeah, I think the book is published by Insemia Publishers.
Mm-hmm.
There is a building in Nairobi known as Undugu Brasa in Nairobi, but we are
Okay.
going to share some contacts, email address, but somebody can even purchase this book through Amazon online. Yes.
Okay, there you have your answer. There's also yet another question directed to you, Professor, yet again. And the person is asking, this is Dr. Mose is asking, is commenting and saying that the book is a critical commentary on the Kenyan University. And that he says that he actually wrote an article to be published by the Daily Nation soon. He's written an article to be published by the Daily Nation soon on that aspect. Do you have anything to say on that?
Wendy, I think that is a very pertinent question. In fact, I've devoted a whole section of about 200 pages talking about university education. And Wendy, if you go through that section, I've been very critical, maybe overcritical of our university system. I have said that we do have challenges in terms of our university policies, in terms of our governance structures, where you find that it leads to some political intervention in our university systems. And you find that in many instances, universities lack that academic autonomy to undertake their work. And there is also the challenge of massification of our education system. What has happened here is that the national government opened so many universities, and the resources which it provided to those universities were not commensurate with the number of universities. We have got now close to 35 public universities, and the resources which are given to those public universities are quite minimal. So there is underfunding, and also you find that we need really to refocus our educational agenda. I've also become very critical on the role of the Commission for University Education. You find that this commission in the Universities Act, it has got so much power, so much mandate, but it has got problems in terms of human resource, very few experts there. And because of that, they don't really manage to do their mandate. When they come maybe to look at curriculums in universities, they end up not only looking at the curriculums, they don't even have the capacity to look at the curriculums. Instead, they look at the supervision of things like the buildings, whether there is enough toilets and all that. So I've been very critical, and I've also initiated that the issues of managing universities is not a walk in the park. We need to depoliticize our universities, and at the same time, we don't need to be very critical and say that there are some degrees which are not useful. I can tell you that any university degree is useful, but it depends on how the kind of paradigm used, the kind of pedagogy in terms of providing the training. So my book is very good at that aspect, and I've been very critical. I've particularly been very critical on the issues at Moi University, where I was and where I grew all the way to become a full professor, because of the issues of corruption, because of the issues of ethnicity. You find that the academic standards were seriously affected. And up to now, I can tell you that there is those negative impacts because of misgovernance in those kind of areas. So that's what I can say in a very brief concerning the issues of university education as by my experience, Wendy.
Thank you for not shying away from from such critical issues, and from just reading the book and also reflecting on what I've seen on the news. You've had a very protracted affair with especially the Commissioner of Higher Education. I believe it's the CUE right now. That's the abbreviation. And anybody who is curious to know the professor's thoughts and the professor's what transpired in 2015 and even before that, like he mentions at Moi University, please get a copy of the book. Like you mentioned, the book is available at Insemia Publishers in Nairobi. That's at Ufundi Cop Plaza, 5th floor. I see somebody has directed them there. And also, I believe online at Amazon, the book is also available. So for Dr. Mose, who is writing an article in The Nation, perhaps you want to read the book before you go to print. There's also another question I also directed to Professor, and this person is curious to know the right age or stage in life that somebody, or rather now in your opinion, somebody can write an autobiography. So as a 30-year-old something, am I ripe for documenting my life, or should I wait?
That is a good question. There's no clear age when somebody can write his or her autobiography. Some people write their autobiography as early as the age of 20. So age is not really a factor. But fundamentally, most people tend to write their autobiography when they have reached, the apex of their age, in their 50s, in their 60s, when they now want to reflect on what they have done in their lives before, they transit to the other form of life.
Thank you for for encouraging even us, not as who have not lived, and yeah, thank you for that. I'd like to take note that we are a little bit over time, and Columbia team, please bear with us as we're trying to wrap up this conversation. We've hardly grazed the book, and I would just like to encourage everybody who has joined us, please just get a copy of the book, to understand not just Professor's story, but the underpinning historical events, his thoughts on higher education and higher education in Kenya, as well as the cultural aspects that are incorporated in the book, amongst other things. And so as we come to a close, anybody else who has a very pressing question, please go ahead and type out before we close. Okay, Dr. Moses says he's read the book word for word, and including punctuation marks. Thank you for that correction. And I would like to come back to Dr. Barasa. In your final closing, and very, very briefly, as we close, if there's anything else that you would like to highlight as a result of this book and that relates to this discussion, please add it to this as you answer my question, that in brief, what have you learned from this story of Professor Akama?
Thank you, Wendy. There are two lessons I've learned from Professor Akama's book. One, parents, especially mothers, should be around to help bring up children in a responsible manner. The reason why I'm saying this is that when you look at the African system of parenting, mostly it is women who take care of the children. They give them their love, they give them their attention and everything, while fathers are known to be breadwinners, and therefore most of the time they're away from home. I want really to say that the author has immortalized the mother, Teresia Kwamboka, who is his heroine. And we see that Kwamboka is a very hardworking and forward-looking, discerning and decisive person. She's also very frugal and very strategic in her decisions. So when you look at the character of the mother, as the author immortalizes her, what we can learn is that in as much as parents, they employ various styles of parenting, when you look at Teresia, she's a very authoritative mother, meaning that she's very democratic, and as a result, she's very responsive, and also not only being responsive, but assertive and not intrusive or restrictive. And that is what has enabled Professor Akama to be a very responsible person. And we can see that as in his administration as a vice chancellor. And even in the book, he was headed so many schools, and he did it very well. My second lesson, the second lesson I learned from this book is that a true patriot or a true leader is ready to use their education and intellect to change the country for the better tomorrow. And that has been exemplified by the author, and as he represents the educated elite who sacrifices themselves to improve their countries. And this good leadership qualities can be drawn from his family, the mother, the father, the grandparents, even great-great-parents. There are leaders who are known in times of crisis. And when we look at the author, we see all those good leadership qualities in him, even as he steers the Kisii University. He demonstrates good leadership qualities. He's very tolerant, very understanding, very discerning, his openness to experience, not even mentioning that his extroversion and agreeableness, and lastly, self-restraint. Therefore, what I want to say is that he is a finished product, or the sum total of his upbringing, which we link so much to the mother. Therefore, those are the two lessons I learned from this particular autobiography. Back to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Dr. Barasa. And because somebody has been quoted to say that not two people read the same book the same way, I would like to pose the same question to Dr. Nyandoro. What are the lessons? What did you learn from this story? And any other parting thoughts that you might have on this book as we close?
Thank you, Wendy. What I get from the book is when you look at the many narratives which the author has weaved, narratives which go back to the cultural community up, narratives which go to his times as a student at Kenyatta University, narratives which transcend the nation, and as we follow him to the globalist stage in the United States of America, what I learned from it is the ability, that what we call as resilience, the ability of the author to go beyond the limitations of life and conquer the world, so to say, that anybody can begin from anywhere, but if they are resilient enough, and if they remain focused, if they have this higher purpose of life, if they want to achieve whatever they want to achieve, but they remain focused with the larger, perspective of life, they will always achieve. This is, for me, the most important thing, that somebody coming from the village where he came from in Mechel could conquer the world in terms of his success in the academy, but also his own image, his sense of who he is in the world and the purpose for which he lives. I think for me, that was the greatest thing that I took home. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you for that comprehensive, you've captured really the title and the spirit of the book, and I believe the spirit of the story, that anybody can be anything. And I think the professor had also alluded to this when he mentioned that he learned the principle of meritocracy, especially when he went and lived in the United States while he was in school there. And as you can see, that's a principle that he's had and held to heart. And as we bring this discussion to a close, I'd like to bring it back to the professor himself. And as somebody who has served and worked really in academia, you would agree with me that the results of the investment, because really education is an investment for parents in their children, are really not the same in the present day as they were maybe 20, 30 years ago, or even at the time that you were going through university education, undergraduate education. And so we have a lot of disillusioned youth who might be thinking, why should I go through university education? Yes, it's a lot of demand on my time and my parents' money, and there could be other avenues that that look like they're a way out of life. Do you have any words of wisdom, any encouragement, or what could you tell the young people today who look at a life of pursuing an education and think, but I'm not guaranteed to come out a winner in life? Anything you have to say to that, Professor?
Thank you, Wendy. I think we need to demystify the role of education. The role of education is more than getting a white-collar job or getting employed. education basically, particularly when we are doing your first degree, is basically to make you to be a better person, make you to be a better manager of your life, a better manager of being a husband, of being wife. So basically, education is more than getting a job. And in fact, ideally, when you are educated, you are given capabilities of being a problem solver. So through that kind of arrangement, you can be able to chart your own way, notwithstanding the current challenges we have of lack of employment and among other things. I would like to challenge the young people that they have got to show commitment in whatever they are doing. They must keep hope alive. They must show resiliency. They must show determination, and they must show hard work. What I've seen with the young people here in our country and elsewhere is that many young people have got negative thinking. They always put barriers before their lives. And because of that, they are not able to achieve much. I will urge the young people to have positive mindset. Furthermore, young people must have clear roadmap. They must have a clear vision on where they want to be tomorrow, where they want to be next year, another year into the future. So without a very clear roadmap, without a very clear vision, young people end up getting lost on the way. Furthermore, our young people look for shortcuts. I've got to tell young people that there are no shortcuts in life. Young people want to get rich. They start gambling here and there, this issue of sport pays and all that. Those things are illusions. Life, you must commit yourself and work hard and be able to achieve real, meaningful returns to your life. So I want to say that young people have got to have hope and be focused and believe that if Akama managed to be a professor and a vice chancellor, they can also make it in life. Because basically, Wendy, I see myself as an average person. I don't have any special things in my life, but basically through hard work, through focus, through determination, I've achieved what I've achieved. So if Akama achieved this much, even them, they can even achieve even better. Yes, Wendy, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that. And also thank you to our co-discussants, Drs. Nyandoro and Dr. Barasa. Indeed, an hour is not justice to this book. That's why I'm encouraging you again, everybody in the participants, all our participants who have joined us, and I see there are many and have all commented, and even those ones following silently. Please get a copy of the book, and I believe you can engage amongst yourselves as well as perhaps another opportunity to engage with the professor. Allow me to sign off at this point as I hand over this discussion or this panel to CGC team. Lilian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. You've been a wonderful moderator.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wendy. That was very informative. Thank you, our panelists and the organizing team members. Thank you for making this webinar a success. My deepest gratitude goes to our audience, to whom we sincerely value your support and participation. And we hope you enjoyed the presentation and discussion. I enjoyed it myself very much. And my takeaway is that don't take life so seriously. I actually laughed at that. Sometimes we take life so seriously. Thank you, Professor, for that. It will be one of my captions every day. We welcome your feedback and comments through our communication channels, and we hope to see you in our next session of the series, as well as other webinars in the pipeline. So to get the latest updates, do remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CGC Nairobi and Instagram cgc.nairobi. And with that, I would like to say a very big thank you and have yourself a splendid evening and day. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.